The coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago. Sarah Mitchell stared at the endless stack of procurement forms scattered across her government-issued desk, each one demanding another signature, another approval, another soul-crushing stamp of bureaucratic compliance. Outside her cramped office window at the Department of Defense Logistics Center in Arlington, Virginia, the October rain drummed against the glass like impatient fingers. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. She'd been here since 5 a.m., buried under mountains of paperwork that seemed to multiply faster than she could process them. Equipment requisitions, budget allocations, vendor contracts. The same mindless shuffle of documents that had defined her existence for the past 18 months. Her supervisor, Deputy Director Robert Hawkins, had made it crystal clear during their morning briefing. Mitchell, I need these files processed by end of day. No exceptions, no excuses. What Hawkins didn't know, what none of them knew, was that before Sarah Mitchell became another faceless cog in the Pentagon's administrative machine, she had been Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, United States Marine Corps Scout Sniper. Before she spent her days drowning in paperwork, she had spent her nights crawling through the mountains of Afghanistan with a Barrett M82A1 rifle strapped to her back, capable of putting rounds on target at distances that would make most people's heads spin. But that was before the incident, before the medical discharge, before they stripped away everything that made her who she was, and handed her a desk job filing other people's mistakes. The transition hadn't been her choice. 6 months earlier, Sarah had been stationed at Forward Operating Base Chapman in eastern Afghanistan, leading a 4-person sniper team tasked with overwatch operations along the Pakistan border. Her record spoke for itself. 127 confirmed kills, 0 missed shots on critical targets, and the legendary reputation among her peers for making impossible shots in conditions that would break lesser shooters. The incident happened on a Tuesday morning in March. Sarah's team had been providing cover for a convoy moving through the Kunar Valley when insurgents launched a coordinated ambush from multiple positions. From her perch 1,200 meters away, Sarah had a clearer view of the chaos unfolding below. Enemy fighters were systematically picking off American soldiers from concealed positions in the rocky terrain. Her spotter, Lance Corporal David Chen, called out targets through his scope. Muzzle flash, 2 o'clock, approximately 800 meters, single shooter behind the boulder cluster. Sarah adjusted her position, feeling the familiar weight of the Barrett against her shoulder. The wind was gusting at 15 miles per hour from the northwest, temperature hovering around 85 degrees Fahrenheit. She calculated the ballistics in her head, a skill that had become as natural as breathing over her 8 years of service. The shot was clean. 1 round, center mass, target neutralized. Good hit, Chen whispered, moving to secondary position, 11 o'clock, 650 meters. For the next 47 minutes, Sarah methodically eliminated 7 enemy combatants, each shot precisely placed to maximum effect. Her team's intervention turned the tide of the ambush, allowing the convoy to reach safety with minimal casualties. It should have been another successful mission, another day of keeping her brothers and sisters in arms alive. Instead, it became the beginning of the end of her military career. The problem wasn't her performance, it was the aftermath. During the post-mission debrief, Sarah experienced what the military doctors would later classify as a, quote, severe psychological episode. The accumulated stress of years in combat zones, combined with the intensity of that particular engagement, had finally caught up with her. She found herself unable to speak coherently, her hands shaking uncontrollably, her mind racing with fragmented memories of every shot she'd ever taken. The medical evaluation lasted 3 weeks. Psychologist after psychologist probed her mental state, asking the same questions over and over. How do you feel about taking a life? Do you experience nightmares? Have you noticed any changes in your emotional responses? Sarah answered honestly. She told them about the dreams that weren't nightmares, but memories played in slow motion. She described the mathematical precision with which she approached each shot, the way her heartbeat would slow to almost nothing in the moments before pulling the trigger. She explained that she didn't feel guilt or remorse. She felt purpose. Every round she fired meant another American soldier would make it home to their family. The doctors didn't understand. They saw her clinical detachment as a symptom rather than a strength. They interpreted her emotional control as evidence of psychological damage rather than professional excellence. In their reports, they painted a picture of a soldier who had become too comfortable with violence, too disconnected from the human cost of her actions. The medical discharge came with full honors and a disability rating for post-traumatic stress disorder, a diagnosis Sarah had never requested and didn't believe she deserved. Within 60 days, she found herself processed out of the only life she'd ever known, handed a government job as compensation for services rendered, and assigned to a desk in a building where the biggest decision she'd make each day was which form to file first. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same military that had spent years training her to be a precision instrument of warfare now questioned her fitness for duty because she was too good at her job. They had created a perfect sniper, then decided that perfection was dangerous. Her new supervisor, Robert Hawkins, was a career bureaucrat who had never served a day in uniform. He treated Sarah like any other desk clerk, assigning workloads based on productivity metrics rather than understanding the background of the person sitting in the cubicle. To him, Sarah Mitchell was simply another government employee with a security clearance and a demonstrated ability to process paperwork efficiently. The other employees in the logistics department knew nothing about her military service. Her personnel file listed her previous occupation simply as armed forces, with no mention of her specific role or achievements. She was invisible among the sea of other former military personnel who had found their way into government civilian positions after their service ended. Sarah adapted to her new reality with the same methodical approach she had once applied to long-range marksmanship. She learned the bureaucratic systems, memorized the regulations, and developed efficient workflows for processing the endless stream of administrative tasks. Her accuracy rate on paperwork was as perfect as her accuracy rate had been with a rifle. 0 errors, 0 missed deadlines, 0 complaints from supervisors. But adaptation wasn't accepted. Every morning when she sat down at her desk, Sarah felt like she was suffocating. The fluorescent lights above her cubicle seemed to press down with the weight of unfulfilled potential. The constant hum of office equipment created a background noise that reminded her of the silence she used to need for perfect shots. The climate-controlled environment felt artificial after years of working in conditions where temperature and humidity could mean the difference between mission success and failure. The breaking point came on a Thursday in late November, 3 months into what Sarah had begun calling her, quote, paper prison sentence. She was processing a batch of equipment requisitions when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Buried in the middle of a routine procurement order for optical equipment was a request that shouldn't have existed. The requisition was for 12 Barrett M8 2A1 sniper rifles, along with matching Leupold Mark IV scopes and 2,000 rounds of .50 caliber match-grade ammunition. The requesting unit was listed as the 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines, the same unit currently deployed to Syria, where Sarah knew from classified briefings they were conducting counterterrorism operations in urban environments. What made her stomach drop wasn't the equipment request itself, but the delivery location. Instead of being shipped to the unit's forward operating base, the rifles were scheduled for delivery to a private military contractor's warehouse in Raleigh, North Carolina. The contractor's name was listed as Meridian Security Solutions, a company Sarah had never heard of, but whose authorization codes matched those used by CIA front operations. She stared at the document for 20 minutes, her mind racing through the implications. Either this was a legitimate black operations procurement being processed through normal channels, which would be a massive security breach, or someone was using falsified military requisitions to acquire precision weapons for unknown purposes. Sarah's training kicked in. She began cross-referencing the authorization codes against the classified database she still had access to from her previous position. What she found made the situation even more disturbing. The authorization codes were legitimate, but they had been issued for a completely different operation, one that had been terminated 8 months earlier after congressional oversight raised questions about civilian casualties. Someone was recycling old operational codes to acquire military-grade sniper rifles, and they were using Sarah's logistics department to do it. The smart move would have been to report her findings to her supervisor and let the proper authorities handle the investigation. But Sarah had learned not to trust the chain of command after her medical discharge. The same system that had declared her unfit for military service while simultaneously assigning her to process classified weapons requisitions clearly had some serious credibility issues. Instead, she decided to dig deeper. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah used her security clearance and administrative access to trace the paper trail behind the suspicious requisition. What she discovered was a sophisticated network of fraudulent procurement orders, stretching back over 18 months. Someone had been systematically acquiring high-end military equipment, not just sniper rifles, but also night vision systems, encrypted communications gear, and specialized ammunition, all through falsified requisitions processed by different government logistics centers. The pattern was brilliant in its simplicity. Each individual order was small enough to avoid triggering automatic review protocols, and they were spread across multiple departments and time periods to prevent anyone from seeing the bigger picture. The only reason Sarah had caught it was because her obsessive attention to detail, the same trait that had made her an exceptional sniper, had flagged an inconsistency that dozens of other clerks had missed. As she pieced together the scope of the operation, Sarah realized she was looking at either the largest theft of military equipment in recent history or a black operations program that was being run completely outside normal oversight channels. Either way, it represented a threat to national security that went far beyond her pay grade. The breakthrough came when she identified the common link between all the fraudulent requisitions. They were all being authorized using codes that had originally been issued to a classified program called Operation Nightfall. Sarah remembered the name from intelligence briefings she had attended during her deployment. Nightfall had been a joint CIA military initiative designed to provide precision fire support for deep cover operatives in hostile territory. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. The program had been shut down after a congressional investigation revealed that it had resulted in civilian casualties in 3 different countries, along with diplomatic incidents that had taken months to resolve. All equipment associated with Nightfall was supposed to have been returned to military inventory, and the authorization codes permanently retired. Except they hadn't been retired. Someone with high-level access was still using them to acquire weapons, and they had been doing it for over a year. Sarah's investigation led her to a name, Colonel Marcus Webb, former program director for Operation Nightfall. According to his official personnel file, Webb had retired from the military 6 months after the program was terminated and had taken a consulting position with Meridian Security Solutions, the same company that was receiving the fraudulent weapons shipments. The pieces were falling into place, but Sarah still couldn't understand the endgame. Why would a retired colonel risk federal prison to steal military equipment? What was Meridian Security Solutions planning to do with a private arsenal of military-grade weapons? The answer came from an unexpected source. While researching Meridian's corporate structure, Sarah discovered that the company had recently been awarded a no-bid contract to provide security services for a classified government facility in Nevada. The contract was worth $200 million over 5 years, and it authorized Meridian to use all necessary force to protect the facility from potential threats. The facility in question was listed in the contract as Research Site Delta 7, which meant nothing to Sarah until she cross-referenced it against her database of classified locations. Delta 7 was a Department of Energy facility, where weapons-grade plutonium was processed and stored. It was also one of the most sensitive nuclear security sites in the United States. Now Sarah understood the scope of what she was looking at. Someone was positioning a private military company to take control of a nuclear facility using stolen government weapons and falsified authorization codes. Whether it was an inside job, a foreign intelligence operation, or something else entirely, it represented a threat to national security that she couldn't ignore. But she also couldn't report it through normal channels. If Colonel Webb had the access needed to steal military equipment and falsify procurement orders, he almost certainly had allies in the chain of command who would bury any official investigation before it could gain traction. Sarah needed proof, not just documentation, but evidence that would be impossible to dismiss or cover up. She needed to catch them in the act. The next weapons shipment was scheduled for December 15th, just 3 weeks away. According to the fraudulent requisition, 6 Barrett rifles would be delivered to Meridian's warehouse in Raleigh, along with enough ammunition to supply a small war. If Sarah could document the delivery and prove that the weapons were being received under false pretenses, she would have the evidence needed to expose the entire operation. There was just one problem. The warehouse was a secured facility with professional security measures. Getting close enough to document the delivery would require skills that had nothing to do with filing paperwork and everything to do with the training that the military had decided she was no longer fit to use. For the first time in months, Sarah felt the familiar calm that had always preceded a difficult shot. She was no longer just a clerk processing other people's mistakes. She was a Marine with a mission, and she had work to do. The Meridian Security Solutions warehouse sat on 12 acres of industrial property outside Raleigh, surrounded by a 10-foot chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Sarah had been conducting surveillance on the facility for 3 days, using vacation time she'd accumulated during her months of bureaucratic exile. She positioned herself in different locations around the perimeter, documenting the security protocols, guard rotations, and delivery schedules. What she observed confirmed her worst suspicions. The warehouse operated more like a military compound than a legitimate business facility. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter in shifts, and she counted at least 15 security cameras covering every angle of approach. Multiple vehicles with government license plates came and went at irregular intervals, and she recognized several faces from classified briefings she'd attended during her deployment. On the second day of surveillance, Sarah spotted Colonel Marcus Webb arriving in a black SUV with tinted windows. Even from 400 meters away, she recognized his distinctive gait and the way he carried himself. The unmistakable bearing of a career officer who had never fully transitioned to civilian life. Webb spent 2 hours inside the warehouse before departing, but not before Sarah captured telephoto images of him directing workers who were unloading wooden crates from a military transport truck. The crates bore the same markings she had seen on legitimate weapons shipments during her time processing logistics requests. Someone wasn't just stealing military equipment. They were using active military personnel and vehicles to transport the stolen goods. The operation had tentacles that reached deep into the command structure, far beyond what a single retired colonel could manage alone. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment reviewing the surveillance photos on her laptop. Her one-bedroom unit was spartanly furnished, reflecting both her military background and her current financial situation. The walls were bare except for a single framed photograph showing her sniper team during their deployment to Afghanistan. Looking at that picture now, she felt a familiar ache for the clarity of purpose that had defined her life before the medical discharge. Her phone rang at 9:47 p.m. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Sarah Mitchell? The voice was male, middle-aged, with a slight southern accent. Who's asking? Someone who knows what you've been doing for the past 3 days. We need to talk. Sarah's blood went cold. She moved to her window and scanned the parking lot below, looking for signs of surveillance. I think you have the wrong number. Raleigh Industrial Park, warehouse complex on Davidson Street. You've been taking pictures. That's not very smart, considering your current employment situation. The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, her mind racing. Either she had been made by Meridian's security team, or someone else was watching the watchers. Neither possibility was comforting. She spent the next hour implementing counter-surveillance protocols she'd learned during her military training. She varied her route home from work, checked for vehicles that appeared multiple times, and looked for any signs that her apartment had been compromised. Everything appeared normal, but Sarah's instincts told her that her investigation had crossed a line from which there might be no return. The next morning brought a development that changed everything. Sarah arrived at work to find Deputy Director Hawkins waiting at her desk with 2 men in dark suits. Their appearance screamed federal law enforcement, and the way they positioned themselves, one blocking her exit route while the other maintained visual contact, confirmed her assessment. Ms. Mitchell, Hawkins said, his voice tight with nervous authority, these gentlemen are from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. They'd like to speak with you about some irregularities in procurement processing. Agent Thomas Bradley, a lean man in his 40s with prematurely gray hair, stepped forward. Ms. Mitchell, we understand you've been conducting unauthorized research into classified requisition orders. That represents a serious breach of your security clearance and could result in federal charges. Sarah kept her expression neutral, falling back on the same emotional control that had served her as a sniper. I'm not sure what you're referring to. I process the documents that are assigned to me according to established protocols. The second agent, who introduced himself as Agent Patricia Vance, pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah surveillance footage from the warehouse complex. The images clearly showed her taking photographs from multiple positions around the perimeter. We know you've been watching the Meridian facility, Vance said. What we want to know is why. Are you working for a foreign intelligence service? Have you been compromised by criminal elements seeking to acquire classified information? Sarah realized she was at a crossroads. She could deny everything and hope they lacked sufficient evidence to press charges. Or she could reveal what she had discovered and hope that Bradley and Vance were legitimate investigators, rather than part of the conspiracy she'd uncovered. The decision was made for her when Agent Bradley pulled out a classified document folder and placed it on her desk. The cover sheet bore the seal of Operation Nightfall. We know about the fraudulent requisitions, Bradley said quietly. We know about the stolen weapons shipments and the falsified authorization codes. What we don't know is whether you're part of the theft ring or if you stumbled onto something bigger than you realized. Sarah studied Bradley's face, looking for tells that would indicate deception. His eye contact was steady, his body language open but alert. Either he was an exceptional liar or he was exactly what he claimed to be. How long have you been investigating this? She asked. 18 months, Vance replied. We've been tracking equipment discrepancies across multiple logistics centers, but we couldn't identify the pattern until 3 weeks ago. That's when your database queries triggered our monitoring algorithms. Bradley leaned forward. Ms. Mitchell, based on your military record, we believe you may have identified connections that our investigation missed. We're prepared to offer you full immunity in exchange for your cooperation, but we need complete disclosure of everything you've discovered. Sarah made her choice. Over the next 2 hours, she walked the agents through her investigation, sharing copies of the documents she'd identified and explaining the connections she'd drawn between the fraudulent requisitions and Operation Nightfall. She showed them the surveillance photos from the warehouse and described Colonel Webb's involvement in the operation. What the agents told her in return painted an even more disturbing picture than she had imagined. The stolen weapons weren't just being acquired for private security operations. They were being sold to international buyers through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Colonel Webb was working with a consortium of former military officers and defense contractors who had turned the American weapons procurement system into their personal profit center. The upcoming delivery to the Meridian warehouse wasn't just another theft. It was the final shipment in a $50 million arms deal with buyers in Eastern Europe. Once those weapons left American soil, they would disappear into the international black market, potentially ending up in the hands of terrorists or hostile foreign governments. We need to catch them in the act, Bradley explained, but the warehouse is too well defended for a conventional law enforcement operation. Any attempt to raid the facility would result in a firefight that could destroy the evidence we need to prosecute the entire network. Agent Vance opened a map of the warehouse complex on her tablet. However, we have intelligence that the final transaction will take place at a different location. Webb has arranged to demonstrate the weapon's capabilities to potential buyers at a private shooting range about 30 miles outside the city. If we can document that demonstration, we'll have proof of intent to export military weapons to foreign nationals. Sarah studied the map, her tactical mind automatically analyzing sight lines, approach routes, and potential observation positions. The shooting range was located in rural farmland, with clear fields of fire extending over a mile in multiple directions. What kind of demonstration? She asked. Bradley consulted his notes. According to our intelligence, Webb plans to show the weapon's precision capabilities by engaging targets at extreme range, specifically hitting a dime-sized target at 1,500 meters. It's apparently a signature test that this particular buyer group requires before finalizing weapons purchases. Sarah felt a cold smile spread across her face. She knew exactly what Webb was planning. And she also knew that he was going to discover that there was still one person in this entire operation who could make that shot better than anyone he had on his payroll. The question was whether she would get the chance to prove it. The Blackwater Ridge Shooting Complex sprawled across 800 acres of North Carolina countryside, its main building tucked into a valley surrounded by rolling hills that provided natural backstops for long-range shooting. Sarah crouched behind a cluster of oak trees 2,200 meters from the complex, adjusting the focus on the military-grade spotting scope Agent Bradley had provided. Through the optic, she could see vehicles arriving for what Webb had scheduled as a quote-unquote private equipment demonstration. She had been in position since 4 a.m., 3 hours before the scheduled demonstration. The federal task force had spent the previous week planning the operation, but Sarah knew that no amount of planning could account for the variables that would determine success or failure in the next few hours. Weather conditions, wind patterns, visibility, and the precise timing of events would all play crucial roles in whether they could gather the evidence needed to bring down the entire network. The morning air was crisp and still, with light fog rolling through the valleys. Perfect conditions for precision shooting. Sarah's breath formed small clouds as she monitored radio traffic between the surveillance teams positioned around the complex. Agent Vance was coordinating from a mobile command post 5 miles away, while Agent Bradley had positioned himself in the hills on the opposite side of the valley with a backup surveillance team. At 7:23 a.m., a convoy of black SUVs arrived at the complex. Sarah counted 12 vehicles total, including a military transport truck that she recognized from her surveillance of the Meridian warehouse. Through her scope, she watched as Colonel Webb emerged from the lead vehicle, followed by 6 men in expensive civilian clothing who moved with the careful awareness of professional security personnel. "Control, this is Overwatch," Sarah spoke quietly into her radio headset. "Primary subjects have arrived. I count 18 individuals total, including 6 potential foreign nationals." "Copy, Overwatch," Vance's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Document everything. We need faces, license plates, and clear evidence of the weapons transfer." Sarah adjusted her camera's telephoto lens and began capturing images of the arrivals. The foreign nationals were clearly not American. Their clothing, mannerisms, and the way they positioned themselves relative to Webb suggested Eastern European origin, consistent with the intelligence about the arms deal. One man in particular, wearing a gray wool coat and carrying a metal briefcase, appeared to be the primary buyer. The group moved toward the complex's main shooting positions, where Sarah could see that several target stands had been set up at various distances extending out to 1,500 meters. Webb was gesturing toward the farthest targets while speaking to the man with the briefcase, his body language suggesting he was describing the demonstration he had planned. At 8:15 a.m., the weapons arrived. Sarah watched through her scope as Webb's security team unloaded wooden crates from the transport truck, each one bearing the same military markings she had seen in the fraudulent requisition documents. The buyers gathered around as the crates were opened, revealing pristine Barrett M82A1 rifles, still in their factory packaging. "Control, weapons are confirmed on site," Sarah reported. "Multiple Barrett rifles, approximately 12 units visible. Buyers are conducting physical inspection of the merchandise." What happened next made Sarah's blood run cold. Webb was pointing toward the 1,500-meter target stand while speaking to his lead shooter, a tall, bearded man Sarah didn't recognize. Through her scope, she could see that the target was a standard precision shooting target with scoring rings, but at the center was a small metallic disc that reflected the morning sunlight. They had actually placed a dime at the center of the target, exactly as the intelligence had indicated. Webb was preparing to demonstrate the rifle's capabilities by making the same type of shot that Sarah had made dozens of times during her military service. But this time the demonstration would seal a weapons deal that could put military-grade precision rifles in the hands of international criminals. The foreign buyers positioned themselves behind the shooting line with binoculars and spotting scopes, clearly expecting to witness something impressive. Webb's shooter began setting up the Barrett rifle on a heavy shooting rest, checking the scope alignment and loading a single round of match-grade ammunition. Sarah realized that she was about to watch someone attempt a shot that she could make in her sleep, but for all the wrong reasons. The technical challenge wasn't the issue. At 1,500 meters, with the right equipment and proper training, hitting a dime-sized target was difficult but achievable. The problem was that this demonstration would prove to the buyers that they were purchasing weapons capable of extreme precision at distances that would make them ideal for assassination or terrorist attacks. Through her radio, she heard Agent Vance coordinating with the tactical teams positioned around the complex. All units, hold position. We need to document the complete transaction before we move. Do not engage until you have confirmation that weapons have changed hands. Sarah watched as Webb's shooter made final adjustments to the rifle and settled into firing position. The man's technique was professional, but not exceptional. He was clearly skilled, but Sarah could see several inefficiencies in his shooting stance and breathing pattern that would affect accuracy at extreme range. The first shot rang out across the valley at 8:43 a.m. Through her scope, Sarah saw the impact strike the target approximately 6 inches low and 2 inches to the right of the dime. A miss, but close enough to impress the buyers who were viewing the target through their own optics. Webb appeared agitated by the miss. He spoke briefly with his shooter, gesturing toward the target and checking wind conditions with a handheld anemometer. The buyers maintained their positions, but Sarah could see body language that suggested they were less impressed than Webb had hoped. The second shot came 3 minutes later. This one struck closer to the center of the target, but still missed the dime by approximately 4 inches. Webb's shooter was competent, but he lacked the precision needed to make the demonstration truly convincing. Sarah found herself in an impossible position. She was watching a criminal transaction that could flood the international black market with precision weapons, but the demonstration was failing because Webb's shooter couldn't make the shot that would seal the deal. Part of her was relieved that the transaction might collapse due to poor marksmanship, but she also knew that Webb would likely find another way to prove the weapon's capabilities, possibly through more dangerous means. The third shot missed entirely, striking the target frame rather than the scoring area. Webb was clearly furious, and the buyers were beginning to show signs of impatience. The man with the briefcase was checking his watch and speaking in what sounded like Russian to his associates. That's when Webb made a decision that changed everything. Instead of continuing with his current shooter, he walked back to the transport truck and emerged with a radio. Sarah couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see Webb speaking urgently into the device while gesturing toward the target. 15 minutes later, a helicopter appeared over the ridge behind the shooting complex. As it landed in a cleared area near the main building, Sarah felt her heart stop. She recognized the aircraft. It was a military transport helicopter, with markings that indicated it belonged to the same logistics command where she currently worked. 3 people emerged from the helicopter, including a woman in military fatigues whose walk Sarah would have recognized anywhere. It was Master Sergeant Jennifer Torres, one of the Marine Corps' top precision shooters and someone Sarah had trained with during her final deployment. Webb had called in a ringer, someone with the skills needed to make the shot that would salvage his arms deal. And based on Torres's reputation, Sarah knew that this demonstration was about to become very successful, very quickly. The question was whether the federal task force would be able to move in time to prevent the transaction from being completed, or if Sarah would have to watch helplessly as military-grade precision weapons were sold to international criminals by her own former colleagues. Master Sergeant Jennifer Torres moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had never missed a shot that mattered. Sarah watched through her scope as Torres examined the Barrett rifle, checking the scope alignment and testing the trigger pull with the methodical precision that separated elite shooters from merely competent ones. Even from 2,200 meters away, Sarah could see the subtle differences in Torres's approach compared to Webb's failed shooter. Torres had been one of the Corps' rising stars when Sarah was medically discharged. Younger by 5 years, she possessed the same natural shooting ability that had made Sarah legendary, but without the psychological baggage that had ended Sarah's career. Watching her now, Sarah felt a complex mix of professional admiration and personal resentment. Torres represented everything Sarah had lost: the respect, the purpose, the identity that came with being the best at something that mattered. "Control. This is Overwatch," Sarah whispered into her radio. "New shooter on site. Military personnel, expert level. This demonstration is about to become very convincing." Agent Vance's voice crackled back immediately. "Understood. Tactical teams are in position, but we still need clear evidence of weapons transfer before we can move. Document everything." Sarah adjusted her camera's focus as Torres settled into shooting position. The foreign buyers had moved closer to the firing line, their earlier skepticism replaced by renewed interest. The man with the briefcase was speaking rapidly to his associates, clearly recognizing that they were about to witness something significantly more impressive than the previous attempts. Torres spent nearly 10 minutes in preparation, checking wind conditions with a digital anemometer, adjusting the rifle's bipod for optimal stability, and calculating ballistic data on a handheld computer. Her thoroughness impressed even Sarah, who had always prided herself on meticulous shot preparation. Torres was treating this demonstration with the same level of precision she would have applied to a combat mission. The first shot came at 9:17 a.m. Sarah tracked the bullet's path through her scope, watching as it covered the 1,500 meters to the target in just over 2 seconds. The impact was perfect, a direct hit on the dime that sent the small coin spinning into the air, clearly visible even at extreme range. The buyer's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. They crowded around their spotting scopes, confirming the hit and speaking excitedly in what Sarah now identified as definitely Russian. The man with the briefcase was nodding approvingly while making notes in a leather-bound journal. Webb was beaming with satisfaction, clearly relieved that his demonstration was back on track. He gestured toward Torres and spoke to the buyers, probably explaining her credentials and the significance of the shot they had just witnessed. Sarah knew that in the world of international arms dealing, a demonstration like this was worth more than any technical specification or manufacturer's guarantee. But Torres wasn't finished. Without being asked, she loaded another round and made adjustments to the scope. Sarah realized with growing concern that Torres was preparing to repeat the shot, probably to prove that the first success wasn't just luck. In the arms trade, consistency was everything. Buyers needed to know that the weapons they were purchasing would perform reliably under battlefield conditions. The second shot came 4 minutes later, another perfect hit, this time on a fresh dime that Webb's security team had placed on the target. The coin disintegrated completely, leaving only small fragments scattered around the target stand. The buyers were clearly convinced. Sarah could see them nodding to each other and pointing toward the weapons crates with obvious satisfaction. That's when Sarah's radio crackled with an urgent transmission from Agent Bradley. "All units, we have movement at the secondary location. Unknown vehicles approaching from the east. This may be the pickup team for the weapons transfer." Sarah swung her scope toward the eastern approach road and confirmed Bradley's report. 3 heavy trucks were approaching the complex, moving in tactical formation with what appeared to be armed escorts. The vehicles were military style but unmarked, suggesting they belonged to the same private military network that Webb was using to transport stolen weapons. "Control confirmed," Sarah reported. "Multiple vehicles inbound. This looks like the extraction team." Agent Vance's voice was tense. "All teams, prepare to move on my signal. We need to intercept before those weapons leave the complex." Sarah knew that the federal task force was about to face a tactical nightmare. The approaching vehicles would likely contain heavily armed security personnel, the complex itself was defended by Webb's team, and the foreign buyers probably had their own protection details. A firefight in open terrain would result in casualties and might allow key suspects to escape with the evidence. But as she watched the scene unfold through her scope, Sarah realized there was another option, one that only someone with her specific skills could execute. Torres was preparing for a third demonstration shot, this time on a target that Webb's team was positioning at an even greater distance. Sarah could see them setting up a new target stand at what appeared to be 1,800 meters, pushing the demonstration beyond the normal effective range of the Barrett rifles. This was showmanship designed to justify the premium prices Webb was charging for the stolen weapons. The tactical situation was becoming increasingly complex. The federal agents needed clear evidence of the weapons transfer to make their case. but they also needed to prevent the weapons from leaving the complex. The approaching vehicles meant that the window for intervention was closing rapidly, and any delay could result in military-grade precision rifles disappearing into the international black market. Sarah made a decision that went against every protocol in the Federal Task Force's operational plan. Instead of continuing her surveillance role, she was going to intervene directly in the demonstration. But her intervention wouldn't involve law enforcement tactics or arrest procedures. It would involve making a shot that would end the arms deal permanently while providing the evidence needed to prosecute everyone involved. She began setting up her own rifle, a custom-built precision system that she had legally purchased after her discharge and modified according to specifications that were still classified. The weapon was chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum, a cartridge that offered superior ballistic performance compared to the .50 caliber rounds that Torres was using. More importantly, Sarah had spent hundreds of hours practicing with this exact rifle system, fine-tuning every component to match her shooting style and preferences. "Control, this is Overwatch," Sarah said quietly into her radio. "I'm moving to active engagement. Prepare to document my position and actions for the official record." Agent Vance's response was immediate and alarmed. "Negative, Overwatch. You are not authorized for direct intervention. Return to surveillance protocol immediately." Sarah switched off her radio. She had spent 18 months following protocols and procedures that had stripped away everything that made her who she was. Today, she was going to remember what it felt like to be a Marine sniper, with a mission that mattered. The plan was simple in concept, but extraordinarily difficult in execution. Sarah would wait until Torres was preparing for her third demonstration shot. Then she would engage the same target from her position, 700 meters farther away than Torres. If she could hit the target before Torres fired, it would not only prove the superiority of American military training to the foreign buyers, but it would also create enough confusion to allow the Federal Task Force to move in during the chaos. The risk was enormous. If Sarah missed, she would blow the federal operation and potentially trigger a firefight that could result in multiple casualties. If she succeeded but couldn't prove her shot had come first, she might be charged with interfering in a federal investigation. And if Webb's security team located her position after she fired, she would be facing professional killers with military-grade weapons, while armed only with a single-shot rifle. But as Sarah settled into shooting position and began calculating the ballistics for a 2,900-meter shot, farther than she had ever attempted in combat, she felt the familiar calm that had always preceded her most important missions. For the first time since her medical discharge, she wasn't just processing other people's paperwork, she was a sniper with a target, and she had work to do. Sarah's breathing slowed to match the rhythm she had perfected over years of precision shooting. At 2,900 meters, she was attempting a shot that pushed beyond the theoretical limits of her rifle system, requiring calculations that accounted for bullet drop, wind drift, atmospheric pressure, and the Coriolis effect of the Earth's rotation. The margin for error was measured in fractions of inches across a distance of nearly 2 miles. Through her scope, she could see Torres making final adjustments for her third demonstration shot. The new target at 1,800 meters had been fitted with what appeared to be multiple dimes arranged in a cluster pattern, creating an even more impressive display for the buyers. Webb was clearly escalating the demonstration to justify the premium prices he was charging for the stolen weapons. Sarah's custom rifle felt familiar in her hands despite the months away from serious shooting. The stock was perfectly fitted to her shoulder, the trigger adjusted to break at exactly 2 pounds of pressure, and the scope zeroed for the specific ammunition she was using. Every component had been selected and tuned to eliminate variables that could affect accuracy at extreme range. The wind was the most critical factor. At ground level, Sarah measured a gentle breeze from the northwest at approximately 8 miles per hour. But wind conditions could vary significantly across the 2,900-meter flight path, especially given the rolling terrain between her position and the target. She would have to estimate wind patterns based on visual indicators, the movement of grass, tree branches, and dust patterns observed through her scope. Sarah began her shooting sequence, following the same mental checklist that had served her through dozens of combat missions. Breathing control came first. She needed to fire during the natural respiratory pause when her body was completely still. Next was trigger control, applying steady rearward pressure without disturbing the rifle's alignment. Finally, follow through, maintaining perfect sight picture and trigger pressure, even after the bullet had left the barrel. At 9:31 a.m., Torres settled into her final shooting position. Sarah could see the Russian buyers gathered behind Torres with spotting scopes and cameras, clearly preparing to document this demonstration for their superiors. The man with the briefcase was speaking into a satellite phone, probably reporting the successful trials to whoever was financing the weapons purchase. The federal tactical teams were positioned but couldn't move without risking the entire operation. Sarah knew that Agent Vance was probably coordinating frantically with her superiors, trying to balance the need for evidence against the risk of allowing military weapons to fall into criminal hands. The approaching vehicles had reached the complex perimeter and were being directed to a loading area, where the weapons crates could be transferred quickly. Sarah made her final ballistic calculations. At 2,900 meters, her bullet would take approximately 3.8 seconds to reach the target, dropping nearly 180 feet due to gravity and drifting approximately 24 inches due to wind. The shot required her to aim at a point significantly above and to the side of the actual target, trusting in physics and years of experience to guide the bullet to its intended impact point. She chambered a single round of match-grade .338 Lapua ammunition, each cartridge hand-loaded to precise specifications for consistency and accuracy. The bullet weighed 250 grains and would leave her rifle's barrel at approximately 2,950 feet per second. By the time it reached the target, it would still be traveling fast enough to completely destroy whatever it hit. Through her scope, Sarah watched Torres take her final sight picture. In approximately 30 seconds, Torres would fire at the 1,800-meter target, impressing the buyers and finalizing a transaction that would put precision weapons in the hands of international criminals. Sarah had to time her shot to impact the target before Torres could fire, creating enough chaos to disrupt the arms deal while proving that American military training produced capabilities that exceeded anything available on the black market. Sarah's crosshairs settled on the tiny target cluster, barely visible even through her high magnification scope. At this distance, the target appeared as a small glint of reflected sunlight, requiring her to aim based on memory and calculation rather than visual confirmation. She began applying pressure to the trigger, feeling the mechanism begin to engage. At 9 hours 33 minutes and 47 seconds a.m., Sarah fired. The recoil drove the rifle back against her shoulder with familiar force, but Sarah maintained her position behind the scope to observe the bullet's impact. For 3.8 seconds, she tracked the invisible projectile across nearly 2 miles of North Carolina countryside, watching for the telltale impact signature that would indicate a hit or miss. The bullet struck the target cluster at 9 hours 33 minutes and 51 seconds a.m., exactly as Torres was beginning to apply pressure to her own trigger. The impact was devastating. All 5 dimes disintegrated simultaneously, sending fragments spinning through the air in a shower of metallic debris that was visible even at extreme range. The effect on the demonstration was immediate and profound. Torres jerked back from her rifle in confusion, clearly unsure of what had happened. The buyers crowded around their spotting scopes, speaking excitedly in Russian, as they tried to understand how the target had been destroyed before Torres fired. Webb appeared stunned, looking between Torres and the target with obvious bewilderment. But Sarah's shot had accomplished more than disrupting the demonstration. The bullet's impact had been so precise and powerful that it had damaged the target stand itself, sending metal fragments in all directions and creating a small crater in the earth behind the target. The buyers were clearly impressed by what they interpreted as an unexpected demonstration of the weapon's destructive capability. That's when Colonel Webb made a critical mistake. Instead of using the confusion to his advantage, he began looking around the surrounding hills with binoculars, obviously trying to determine where the shot had come from. His security team spread out across the complex, scanning the perimeter for signs of an external shooter. Sarah knew she had perhaps 60 seconds before Webb's security team would begin a systematic search of the surrounding terrain. Her shot had given the federal task force the opening they needed, but it had also exposed her position to armed professionals who would not hesitate to eliminate any threat to their operation. She grabbed her radio and switched to the federal frequency. "Control, this is Overwatch. Target neutralized. Execute, execute, execute." Agent Vance's response was immediate. "All teams, go! Move now!" Sarah could see vehicles racing toward the complex from multiple directions as the federal tactical teams launched their coordinated assault. Helicopters appeared over the ridges, and she could hear the distinctive sound of flashbang grenades detonating inside the complex buildings. The arms deal had collapsed into chaos, with buyers and sellers scattering in different directions as federal agents moved to secure the stolen weapons. But Webb's security team had located Sarah's muzzle flash signature on the hillside. She could see armed men moving up the slope toward her position, advancing with the tactical discipline of experienced soldiers. Sarah had accomplished her mission, but now she faced the immediate challenge of surviving the aftermath. She began a fighting withdrawal through the oak forest, using terrain and vegetation to mask her movement while federal helicopters provided air support. The irony wasn't lost on her. After 18 months of filing paperwork in a government office, she was once again running through hostile territory with people shooting at her. The pursuit lasted 47 minutes before federal agents secured the area and arrested the remaining members of Webb's security team. Sarah emerged from the woods with her hands raised, immediately identifying herself to the tactical team leader as the federal observer who had fired the disruptive shot. Agent Bradley met her at the extraction point, his expression a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "Ms. Mitchell, that was either the most brilliant tactical intervention I've ever witnessed, or the most reckless violation of federal law enforcement protocol in recent history." Sarah shouldered her rifle and looked back toward the complex, where federal agents were loading the stolen weapons into evidence trucks, while Webb and the Russian buyers were processed for arrest. "Agent Bradley, 6 months ago I was putting rounds on target at distances like this to protect American soldiers. Today I did it to protect American weapons from falling into the wrong hands. I'm not sure I see the difference." 3 weeks later, Sarah received a phone call from Agent Vance. The investigation had resulted in the arrest of 47 individuals across 12 countries, the recovery of over $200 million in stolen military equipment, and the disruption of an international arms trafficking network that had been operating for over 3 years. "Ms. Mitchell," Vance said, "the Justice Department has a proposition for you. We're forming a specialized unit that investigates weapons trafficking and procurement fraud. The position would involve a significant amount of field work, some of it in hostile environments. Are you interested?" Sarah looked around her cubicle at the Department of Defense Logistics Center, where stacks of procurement forms still waited for her signature. Through her office window, she could see the October rain continuing to fall on Arlington, Virginia. "Agent Vance," she replied, "when do I start?" The federal courthouse in Charlotte buzzed with activity as the largest weapons trafficking trial in recent history entered its final week. Sarah sat in the witness gallery, watching as prosecutors presented evidence that had taken 8 months to compile. The stolen weapons, the falsified documents, the intercepted communications, and most importantly, the high-definition video footage of her 2,900-meter shot that had disrupted the entire operation. Colonel Marcus Webb sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his military bearing reduced to the slumped posture of a man facing life in federal prison. Beside him, the Russian arms dealers who had flown halfway around the world to purchase stolen American weapons now faced extradition proceedings that would likely result in them spending the next several decades in various international correctional facilities. Master Sergeant Jennifer Torres had accepted a plea agreement in exchange for her testimony against Webb. The military court-martial that preceded the federal trial had stripped her of rank and benefits, but her cooperation with investigators had reduced her sentence to 5 years in military prison. Sarah felt no satisfaction watching Torres's career destroyed. They had both been weapons in the hands of people who saw soldiers as expendable assets rather than human beings. Agent Patricia Vance approached Sarah during a recess, carrying a thick folder of documents. "The defense attorneys are going to call you as their final witness tomorrow," she said. "They're going to argue that your shot proves their clients were entrapped, that federal agents used excessive force to disrupt a legitimate business transaction." Sarah studied the legal documents Vance handed her. The defense strategy was clever, but fundamentally flawed. They were claiming that Sarah's intervention had been illegal, that her shot had endangered civilians, and that the entire federal operation had been designed to entrap Webb rather than investigate genuine criminal activity. "What they don't understand," Sarah replied, "is that I wasn't acting as a federal agent when I took that shot. I was acting as a Marine who saw American weapons being sold to people who would use them to kill American soldiers." The next morning, Sarah took the witness stand wearing the same conservative business suit she had worn to her government job for 18 months. The defense attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Richard Caldwell, began his cross-examination by attacking her credibility and mental fitness. "Ms. Mitchell, isn't it true that you were medically discharged from the Marine Corps due to psychological instability?" Caldwell asked, his voice carrying the practiced tone of someone accustomed to destroying witnesses on cross-examination. "I was discharged following a psychological evaluation that concluded I was too effective at my job," Sarah replied calmly. "The military decided that my ability to function efficiently under combat stress indicated a lack of appropriate emotional response to taking human life." Caldwell consulted his notes. "According to your military psychological evaluation, you were described as, quote, clinically detached and potentially dangerous due to your abnormal comfort with violence. How do you respond to that assessment?" Sarah looked directly at the jury. "I respond by pointing out that I spent 8 years protecting American soldiers from people who wanted to kill them. Every shot I took saved lives. The military trained me to be precise, efficient, and emotionally controlled under pressure. When they decided those qualities made me dangerous, they discharged me and gave me a desk job processing the same types of weapons I had used to protect American interests overseas." The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Margaret Chen, objected before Caldwell could continue. "Your Honor, the witness's military record and psychological evaluation are not relevant to the criminal charges against the defendants." Judge Harrison sustained the objection, but Sarah could see that her response had made an impact on the jury. Several jurors were taking notes, and their body language suggested they understood the irony of her situation. Caldwell shifted tactics. "Ms. Mitchell, when you fired that shot on December 15th, you were acting without authorization from federal law enforcement. You had no legal authority to discharge a weapon during an active investigation. Isn't that correct?" "That's correct," Sarah acknowledged. "I was acting as a private citizen who observed what I believed to be a threat to national security." "A private citizen armed with a military-grade precision rifle, conducting unauthorized surveillance of a legitimate business transaction," Caldwell pressed. "How is that different from vigilante justice?" Sarah paused before answering, considering her words carefully. "Mr. Caldwell, 3 weeks before that demonstration, I was filing paperwork for equipment requisitions that I knew had been falsified. I had evidence that American military weapons were being stolen and sold to foreign nationals. I reported my findings to federal authorities, who confirmed that an international arms trafficking operation was using our government's own procurement system to acquire weapons that would be used against American interests." She leaned forward slightly. "When I saw Master Sergeant Torres preparing to demonstrate those stolen weapons to Russian arms dealers, I had 2 choices. I could continue following protocols and procedures that had already failed to prevent the theft, or I could use the skills the Marine Corps had spent 8 years teaching me to protect American weapons from falling into enemy hands." Caldwell was clearly frustrated by Sarah's composed responses. "Ms. Mitchell, you made a 2,900-meter shot with a custom rifle from an unauthorized position. That level of precision requires extensive planning and preparation. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. You planned to interfere with the federal investigation from the beginning." "No, Mr. Caldwell," Sarah replied. "I plan to document the federal investigation. The decision to intervene came when I realized that the demonstration was succeeding and the weapons would be transferred to foreign nationals within minutes. My shot didn't interfere with the investigation. It prevented a successful completion of the criminal transaction that the investigation was designed to stop. Assistant U.S. Attorney Chen stood for redirect examination. Ms. Mitchell, in your professional opinion as a former military sniper, what would have happened if those weapons had been successfully transferred to the Russian buyers? Sarah considered the question. Based on the buyer's behavior and the specific weapons involved, those rifles would have been transported out of the United States within hours. Barrett M82A1 rifles with precision scopes are specifically designed for long-range assassination and anti-materiel operations. In the hands of hostile foreign nationals, they represent a direct threat to American military personnel and civilians in any theater where those nationals might operate. Chen nodded. And what was the significance of your specific shot placement and timing? I chose to engage the target before Sergeant Torres could fire because I needed to create maximum disruption while demonstrating superior capability, Sarah explained. The shot had to be precise enough to destroy the target completely, but it also had to come from a distance that exceeded Torres's demonstration range. The message to the buyers was clear. American military training produces capabilities that they couldn't purchase on the black market. The trial concluded 2 days later with guilty verdicts on all major charges. Webb received a sentence of 25 years in federal prison, while the Russian buyers faced additional charges in international courts. The stolen weapons were returned to military inventory, and the entire procurement fraud network was dismantled. But for Sarah, the trial's conclusion was less important than what had happened 3 months earlier. Agent Vance's job offer had led to a position with the Department of Justice's newly formed International Weapons Trafficking Task Force. Sarah's unique combination of administrative knowledge, technical expertise, and operational experience made her invaluable for investigating procurement fraud cases that involved both bureaucratic manipulation and field operations. Her first assignment took her to Eastern Europe, where she spent 6 weeks tracking weapons shipments that had been diverted from legitimate military aid programs. The work required her to analyze documents during the day and conduct surveillance operations at night, using both her administrative skills and her military training in ways that complemented rather than conflicted with each other. The second assignment was more challenging. A joint CIA-FBI investigation had identified a network of defense contractors who were systematically overcharging the military for equipment while delivering substandard weapons to frontline units. Sarah's job was to infiltrate the contractors' administrative systems, document the fraud, and provide tactical intelligence for the arrest operations. The work was everything her government desk job hadn't been: challenging, meaningful, and directly connected to protecting American interests. More importantly, it required her to be exactly who she was, rather than trying to suppress parts of her identity that others found uncomfortable. 6 months after the trial, Sarah found herself back in Afghanistan, but this time as a civilian contractor working with military intelligence to investigate weapons theft from forward operating bases. She was assigned to the same region where she had served as a sniper, but her role now involved identifying how American weapons were being diverted to insurgent forces. The investigation led her to a forward operating base where she had spent 3 months during her final deployment. The base commander, Colonel Jennifer Walsh, had been Sarah's direct supervisor during some of her most successful missions. Walsh remembered Sarah's reputation but was initially skeptical about her civilian contractor status. Mitchell, Walsh said during their first briefing, "I heard about your medical discharge. I also heard about that shot you made in North Carolina. Which version of you am I working with?" Sarah smiled for the first time in months. "Colonel, I'm the same person I was when I worked for you before. The difference is that now I get to use all of my skills, instead of being told that some of them make me too dangerous for military service." The investigation at the forward operating base revealed a sophisticated theft operation involving both military personnel and local contractors. Weapons were being systematically diverted during transport operations, with false documentation created to hide the losses. Sarah's administrative expertise allowed her to identify the paper trail, while her tactical knowledge helped her understand how the thefts were being executed. The breakthrough came when Sarah identified a pattern in the timing of weapons convoys and insurgent attacks. The stolen weapons weren't just being sold, they were being used to target the same American forces from whom they had been stolen. Her analysis led to a coordinated operation that resulted in the recovery of over 400 stolen weapons and the arrest of 12 individuals involved in the theft network. Colonel Walsh's final evaluation of Sarah's performance was unequivocal. Contractor Mitchell has demonstrated exceptional analytical capabilities combined with operational expertise that significantly exceeds typical civilian contractor standards. Her unique background enables her to identify security vulnerabilities that would be missed by personnel with either purely administrative or purely tactical training. 1 year after the Charlotte courthouse trial, Sarah received a phone call from Agent Vance while she was reviewing procurement documents in a secure facility outside Kabul. "Mitchell, we have a situation in Central America that requires your specific skill set," Vance said. Drug cartels have been acquiring American weapons through a network that involves both procurement fraud and direct theft from military shipments. The operation crosses multiple international boundaries and requires someone who can work both sides of the problem. Sarah looked out the window at the Afghan mountains, where she had once crawled through hostile territory with a rifle strapped to her back. Now she was sitting in an air-conditioned office, using her security clearance to access databases that revealed how American weapons were being diverted to people who would use them against American interests. "Agent Vance," she replied, "when do I leave?" 3 weeks later, Sarah was rappelling from a helicopter into the jungles of Guatemala, part of a joint DEA-FBI operation targeting cartel weapons suppliers. She carried both a laptop computer loaded with procurement database software and a custom sniper rifle designed for tropical environments. Her mission was to provide technical analysis of weapons shipment patterns while serving as precision overwatch for the tactical teams. The operation was a complete success. Sarah's administrative analysis identified 3 separate networks through which American weapons were reaching cartel forces, while her tactical capabilities enabled the arrest teams to operate with confidence in hostile territory. The combination of skills that had made military psychologists question her fitness for service had become the foundation of a career that was both personally fulfilling and strategically valuable. 2 years after leaving her government desk job, Sarah stood on a hillside in Colombia, adjusting the scope on her rifle while reviewing satellite intelligence on her tablet computer. Tomorrow she would testify via video link at another federal trial, this time involving defense contractors, who had been selling weapons to cartels through a network of shell companies and falsified export licenses. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, using every skill she possessed to protect American interests in a world where bureaucratic precision and tactical excellence were equally important for mission success. Her radio crackled with a transmission from the tactical team leader. "Overwatch, this is ground team. We're moving to phase 2. Maintain surveillance on the compound entrance." Sarah settled into shooting position and replied, "Ground team, this is Overwatch. I have eyes on target. You are cleared to advance." For the first time since her medical discharge, Sarah Mitchell was doing the job she had been born to do, protecting American soldiers and American interests using every weapon in her considerable arsenal. The bureaucrats who had tried to reduce her to a desk clerk had failed to understand a fundamental truth about people like her. They could make her file papers, but they couldn't make her forget how to put 5 rounds through a dime at 1,500 meters. And in a world where both skills were necessary for mission success, that combination made her irreplaceable. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.